Hello, I'm the middle-aged revolutionary, and welcome to part 4 of our book review of Paul Embery's book, Despised, Why the Modern Left Loathes the Working Class. And joining me, as ever, is my friend and comrade, Terry. Terry, hello, good afternoon and welcome.
All right, Jason. How are you?
I'm very well. How are you? Enjoying the
Good, yeah.
last of the summer?
Yes, it's
Very
definitely
lovely
the
day
last of the
outside.
summer.
For those
Definitely
of
the
you,
last of the summer. Next time we have a meeting, we'll have the heating on.
yeah, no doubt we will. We're recording this on the afternoon of Friday, the 20th of September. In Essex, it's 22 degrees and sunny. Very clear skies. Autumn's almost with us, but summer's still hanging on for grim death.
Mm.
So, welcome to part 4. Now, as you know, for regulars who've been watching this series from the beginning, we've been going through each chapter of Paul Embery's book in turn. We did the first two chapters in parts 1 and 2, obviously, but parts 3 and 4 have been surrounding one chapter. And that's because we found quite a lot of things to cover in this particular chapter. So we decided to split it into 2. So it's been a few weeks since we recorded the last part. But I remember saying at the beginning of the last episode, part 3, that I thought that wokedom, for want of a better word, and if you can think of a better word, please drop it in the comments under this video. But wokedom had peaked. That I thought that wokedom had sort of found its nadir and was now on the slide. I've had a few weeks to think about it, and I'm not 100% sure I was correct in that analysis. Looking at how liberal wokedom, again for want of a better term, which is based on essentially it's based on identity politics, which is bourgeois ideology, as we know, pervades all aspects of the bourgeois superstructure. And I'm by the bourgeois superstructure, I include entities like the police, the judiciary, the media. Let's think, where else? Academia, another good example. So all the things that we would call perhaps the pillars of civilized society. And I think the long and the short of it is that in those pillars, that liberal wokedom is still alive and well and continue to perpetuate. Would you agree necessarily
Yeah,
with that?
I do. I mean, we did think about that after um, when you said that, because the book is a couple of years old. But you're right. You're right. It's still everywhere. Um, there's examples of it all the time um, in the book, but also you can look back at now and you see, well, that's exactly it. Woke, what they're doing with Facebook, different things, and it's still going on. So it hasn't in that respect. It's still tingling away. The trans issue's still going, ID, gender ID. It's still going very much so. I think, in fact, it's becoming more
Mm.
with things that are happening around the world with regard to women's spaces and trans wanting to get into them and all that capable and all this gender ID.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, you're right. I think it's still there with its ugly little face.
Yeah,
Wokedom.
absolutely. And it should be said that Paul Embery's book was published in 2021. Where, as I said in the last episode, I thought that was where liberal wokedom had peaked. Um, I think things have changed slightly, but I don't think they've changed as much as perhaps I thought. And as I said, the way it pervades all these, and in the main, they are what you would call sector, um, public sector organisations. So things like the police and academia and things like that. But not only that, obviously, liberal wokedom pervades big companies as well. Companies like BlackRock, for instance, have got huge DEI initiatives ongoing, very much bought into the liberal wokedom ideology. So it's not just public sector, it's not just governmental organisations, it's also big private finance as well that's also all in on this. But to pick up on where we left off, the last part of uh, chapter 3 that we looked at was on page 104, And so we'll pick up on page 106. So I'll quote the text from Paul's book as follows. Middle of page 106. And I quote, "But rather than support a policy that emphasizes and celebrates separateness, the left must turn its hand to fostering the deepest, though nonetheless unforced, social and cultural consensus across our communities, not only in the interest of bringing estranged people together, but also because, once again, the maximum class-based unity is essential in the struggle to advance the interests of the working class. Yet, as it is with other forms of identity politics, class is relegated to a sideshow in the pursuit of multiculturalism."
Yeah.
And one of the things that I reflected on that passage was that there used to be an ethos in the Labour movement, and I think it's something we touched on in the last episode, but it's worth talking about again, where in the main, if you were a working class person in an employer or a union or whatever, then everything else was secondary. The fact that you were working class was the most important thing, and your race, your gender, your religion, and whatever other protected characteristic you may or may not have was secondary in any consideration. It didn't matter that you were any or all of those things. All that mattered was that you were working class.
Yeah.
And that's completely, well, not completely, but it's the reaction that you get, especially in trade union circles, when you bring up the subject of class. I get the impression these days, I don't know whether you do, but I get the impression these days, the minute you talk about class, you're labelled as some sort of Marxist straight off the bat before you've even said anything else. You know, he's going to start quoting Karl Marx and Lenin at us any second now. He's just talked about the working class.
Well, yeah.
There's virtually nobody at the helm of the Labour movement which is working class.
No.
Which is why we have, to a degree, this problem in the Labour movement, isn't it?
Well, it's one of the things that's bugged me for a while. It's they don't use the word working class, working class. They say working people. And
that's it.
Does that mean that I, as a pensioner, I'm not a working person. I'm working class. But if they only say they're going to look after working people, it just goes to show that's what they really must mean when they say, "Oh well, let's get rid of the winter fuel payment for working pension for old pensioners who don't work." Do you know what I mean? Where I'm getting at. Now, I might be totally wrong, but it's just that they keep. I know they're terrified of using the word class. They want that to vanish. And it's soon, as you say, just and as Embery says, to work on people's identity with regards to the skin colour, the sex, what sex they decide they're going to be. Whereas to just do away with class is once again an issue to divide the working class, because you've got people arguing about issues that they wouldn't argue about really before, because they were all in the same boat, no matter what colour you were or sexual orientation. You were there you were working class, and that was it. And a lot of it's been hijacked by people who, as you rightly said, just have never worked a day in their lives, in my opinion, in some cases. I don't think Keir Starmer's worked a day. I suppose if you could say being a lawyer, yeah, you would. It is work. But some of those MPs have just been councillors. They've come through law school, they've become councillors. They've wandered around, they've ticked off the boxes and worked their way up the ladder till the next thing in line is they're an MP or the parachuted in. But they're not working class. Not as we know it.
No. I mean, I think we touched on this again in the last episode. It's been a little while since we recorded it, but I'm sure we touched on it.
Yeah, we did.
And if you didn't know better, getting a law degree is one of the easiest things to do, because half the members of parliament have got law degrees or they're lawyers, and half of them are as thick as pig shit. And you just think, how on earth are all these people in parliament saying such stupid things, such ignorant and poorly educated things, and they've all got law degrees?
Yep, exactly.
Unbelievable. But
that's what I think what we said last time, one of us said that it must be the easiest degree to get in the world, because all these thick bastards in Parliament have got it.
Yeah, you must get law degrees in crackers these days.
Yes, you do. Yeah, you do.
It appears to be, and I'm not doing down anyone who's studying law at the moment, but it looks like, given some of the people that I see in Parliament who've got law degrees, who aren't the brightest buttons, it must be perhaps more straightforward than I thought it was.
Names. Oh,
No,
there's a
I'm
few.
not
It's
going
a
to.
long list, but we won't want to single.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. But yes, I mean we've got it's not necessarily trade union general secretaries. We've got a lot of people at the very top end of trade union bureaucracies who are not working class people. They're university, and it's not to say, oh God, make a point of stressing this. Just because you've been to university doesn't mean you're not working class. But in my experience, a lot of people in trade union bureaucracies and a lot of people in the employ of the trade union movement are not only university educated, but they are not working class. They're people who've come from quite middle class stock and uh, come into the trade union movement with this sort of combination of middle class sensibilities and the indoctrination that you get through university,
Yeah,
which together is quite a heady combination in the trade union movement and is almost antithetical to everything that working class people believe in.
Mm.
And it's part of the reason why, and I know we're going a little bit off topic because we're always going to be talking about trade unions, I suppose, given our backgrounds, but you got a trade union bureaucracies now who would much rather working class people just stayed in their box, a bit like the Labour Party do.
yeah,
Stay in your box. If it all kicks off in your workplace, then we might come and help. But otherwise, just pay your dues and shut up, basically.
yeah.
Because
That's
we
what it
don't.
seems to be now.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And you know, these people don't have very much contact with the working class, and I put in one of my notes here, it's why people like Dr. Joe Grady, who is the General Secretary of the Universities and Colleges Union, has on the record eschewed class politics in favour of lunacy like identity politics. You know, the idea that taking a group of people who have one key thing in common, which is their class, and then dividing them all by their race, their sex, their religion, by all kinds of other things, is exactly what the ruling class would want us to do. You know, if you had a group of people all bonded together by one common interest, their own class,
Mm.
what way would you defeat that? Then you'd split them up. You'd split them up
Exactly.
by characteristics and you play them all off against each other and you
Yeah.
celebrate their difference in inverted commas, while at the same time knowing that what you're really doing is dividing.
Yes, we've said this. Yeah, we have touched on that.
Yeah.
And I quite like the um where you said that's why idiots like Dr. Joe Grady. She is an idiot.
Yeah. One of the worst trade unionists I've ever come
Yeah,
across.
absolutely. And I think there's a
Yeah.
fringe meeting on Monday morning, or is it Saturday? I can't remember. I'd have to look in my diary again in Liverpool. And she's speaking at it, and I thought, oh, that might be interesting. It's 11 o'clock, and it's in the Casa de la Revolución, Cuba de la Revolución. It's a bar in the boot in by the docks, out the dock. And I thought, oh, that'd be good. And then I thought, I seen her name, one or two others, and I thought, fuck, no, I'm not going over there because I'd end up getting slung out into the street. You know,
Yeah.
they start spouting this bloody wokedom,
Mm.
and I thought it was aptly named. You know, that Cuba, the bar to celebrate the Cuban Revolution, and they've got the likes of her in it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you can kind of picture in your mind already what sort of speech it's going to be.
Oh yeah,
Blah 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 solidarity, blah 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 stick together, blah 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 working class. She'll chuck that in a couple of times. She'll talk about her own earthly working class roots. She'll talk about her dad being a miner. I know because I saw her do a speech exactly like that at Durham 2 years ago,
yeah,
and I was unimpressed then. You know, and then once it's all done, once she's taken the plaudits and the applause, she'll bugger off and will do nothing and
no,
change nothing and work
no,
to resolve nothing. You know,
yeah, yeah,
it's all about getting these people in, getting them to do some sort of rousing speech, chucking a few sound bites, talk about solidarity a few times, and sod off. And that's how they do things, isn't it?
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. We'll move on then to page 108 now of the book, where he continues to talk about identity politics, and I quote, "Perhaps the most contentious area of debate when it comes to identity politics, one that has led to a mini civil war on the left and seen a disturbingly high-handed approach by the police, is transgenderism. In 2017, the Tory government floated the idea of reforming the Gender Recognition Act to allow individuals to legally self-declare as the opposite gender without having to go through a medical process. With this proposal, a bomb was detonated, and what had previously been an obscure debate suddenly opened into the mainstream." And the issue with self-identity is one that is quite an explosive issue in this country, isn't it? There's a number of people who have organised against self-identification. Basically, for those people who aren't fully aware of what it means that self-ID laws means that a person can identify into whatever gender they want without having to go through any medical or legal loopholes, or go through any medical or legal hoops, I should say. The current law as it stands is covered by essentially two pieces of legislation. One is the 2004 Gender Recognition Act, and the other is the 2010 Equality Act. And currently, in order for someone to legally change their gender, they have to socialise as the opposite sex for a period of 2 years and have a signed certificate from a doctor saying they have a condition called gender dysphoria. If they have that, then they can change their gender. Under Theresa May, the Tories were at least examining the possibility of introducing gender ID laws, which would allow, as I said earlier, someone to identify into a different gender to the one that they were born with. And obviously, when you look at, I don't want to talk too much about conservatism as a thing, but it struck me as something that was very non-conservative. You know, the idea that a conservative government, and especially when you talk to people who are of a conservative persuasion, talk about conservative governments of the past. And one question that is worth posing to them was, do you think a conservative government would have brought in something like gender self-ID in 2017, I think it was? And the answer would be, well, based on recent history, or perhaps even not so much recent history, but a lot further back, then probably not. But then perhaps in a way it's an indication of really the Tories' slide into liberalism, which is not, to be clear, has not started in 2017. I would argue it started probably in 1979, when Margaret Thatcher's Tory government was elected. But I mean, I would argue the Conservatives stopped being conservative around about then, and show no signs of returning back to their conservative roots anytime soon. But on the subject of gender identification and transgenderism in general, more or less the entire left is all in on it. They're all in on the
Joe Grady's union is UCU, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Well, now you say like in the comments that its policy, the union policy, is that anyone can identify into any gender, race, disability that they wish.
Yeah.
And I pondered this the other day, and I was thinking, before we were having this, that if you can now self-identify as anything, and it's legal to do so, could I self-identify, and I wrote down, I self-identify as a black female schizophrenic paraplegic, would I be able to claim PIP and disability benefits based on that? And you wouldn't.
No.
So the Department of Work and Pensions wouldn't accept me self-identifying as a disabled person for me to get better. But I'm disabled. Well, you're not disabled. Look at you. So how can you identify as something? Even the government doesn't allow that to happen. Yet they say you can. The difference is go from a man to a woman. No, that's okay, but you can't become disabled, and yet this union leader and union accepts the policy that you can identify into any gender. Well, I don't know what they mean by that. There's only two: any gender, race, and disability that they wish. I just do not get where they're coming from with that.
Well, again, it goes back to what we were saying before. This is what identity politics and woke ideology creates. This is the net result of that ideology, isn't it? It's the idea that so on the one hand, woke ideology is about identifying and identity politics, which is it's sort of relative. It's all about identifying the differences in people.
Yes.
But then you go beyond identifying the differences in people to saying, well, not only can you identify the differences in people, people can be any of those differences that they want to be.
Yeah, but it's the word it's stupid, and people can't see it. I mean, I know I've said it before. I'll probably say it again about Piers Morgan. He's not everyone's cup of tea, but sometimes he does make a good point. And he was on with one of these so-called. I think the guy is he's just looking for causes to get offended by, or statements to be offended by, or if you misgender somebody, it's a big, let's go out and get on the barricades for this. And Morgan said to him, well, I'll identify from now on as a woman then. He said, well, don't be ridiculous, you're a man. He said, well, you said anyone can identify as anything. So there's the answer, isn't it? It's bullshit.
Well, I mean, I think I know the clip you're talking about. And it's, I think in essence, the key thing that particular guest on the show was pushing back against was not the fact that Piers Morgan could or couldn't identify as the opposite sex. It was the fact that he felt that Piers Morgan was not acting in good faith.
Well,
so in order to identify as a different gender, you have to have faith as well. And the whole thing with the ideology, like a lot of these woke ideologies, they're more faith-based than anything else. They have a pseudo-religious quality about them. And much like a lot of organized religions, you don't need evidence, you don't need proof if you have faith. If you have faith in something, you don't need God, for instance, and I don't want to go down a sort of religious rabbit hole, but you don't, if you're a religious person who believes in God, you don't need God to prove his existence. You have faith he exists. Okay. And it's similar with this woke ideology. You do not need proof. You have faith, and faith is enough. And that's how these ideologies work. There are some that try to give it sort of a pseudo-scientific quality in some circumstances and not necessarily in others, but whatever they do, ultimately, these are all underpinned by faith. There's faith underpinning these, just like in religion, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's I mean, the University and Colleges Union is part of this manufacturing. It's part of the process. It's part of the mechanisms of manufacturing bourgeois ideology in academia. They're as much in on it as the ruling class are. They are 100% part of the process of indoctrination of people who go to university. Now, that's not to say that everyone comes out of university indoctrinated, but there is certainly a process of indoctrination that goes with going to university, and the UCU and their members are part and parcel of that process.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's beyond doubt. Now, again, I'm not saying that every student that comes out of university comes out indoctrinated, and I'm not saying everyone in the UCU who is a UCU member is indoctrinating these people. But there are a lot of students that are indoctrinated, and there are a lot of UCU activists who are doing the indoctrinating. It's a process of production, of ideological production, that the ruling class need these people to carry out in order that they come out of university with these attitudes. And then, as we said earlier on, a lot of them will end up in big business, they'll end up in the public sector, and then end up in the trade union movement.
Yeah, it's a bit like, I suppose, you work in an echo chamber. You only hear what you want to hear.
Yeah.
You're in a little bubble. like the Westminster bubble or other bubbles. You're in, and you only hear or what you want to hear
Yes.
in that. And if everyone agrees with you in that little bubble, everything's fine.
Yeah.
Forget what happens out here, outside the bubble.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's the way I have to try and, because I struggle with this. I have to read that chapter at least 10 times, 8 times to get it in, because I just don't get this woke, because it's not of my generation. It's not anything when I was young growing up. Kids today understand words that they weren't even invented. They weren't even in the dictionary when. I mean, the only gaslight I knew was one that used to be one of the last ones on the railway station up by us, the local one, where a guy used to come around at night and pull it off.
Yeah.
So old I am.
Yeah.
There you go.
No, that's right. But no, I mean, working class ideology always used to be basically, it was always them and us.
Correct.
Always them and us. And you knew who, and I think you mentioned this in a previous video that we recorded. You know, it was the most important ethic as a working class person you could have was to know who was on your own side and who was your enemy.
Yeah.
And woke ideology and identity politics, it's ideological cousin, if you like, is designed to split that. It's designed to split that. It's designed to make people believe that other working class people are your enemy.
Yeah.
And that other people in the working class are down to hold you back and hold you down.
Say that it's to split our class.
Absolutely.
To find something else for us to argue amongst ourselves. They couldn't do it with black and white. That didn't work. They tried it with Judaism and Christianity or anti-Semitism, if you want to put it down that road. That doesn't seem to have worked because it's died a death. I wonder if that was because Corbyn was the only anti-Semite in the Labour Party. I don't know. But that seems to have gone now, even though Starmer keeps going on and on about it, you know. So yeah, I see it as that, because it was never anything like that when I was growing up. And unless kids now can cut through the red tape or the crap bullshit, if you want, for one of another word, they're going to be lost. They're going to be lost to us. They're going to be lost to a working class. They're going to become part of this amorphous blob that is gender ID or ID politics or whatever.
Absolutely.
That's where we need to be saying to young people. And it's like Starmer said, and this is off subject a minute, but he said, from now on, Holocaust education will be given in all schools. Fair enough. But as long as it's balanced as part of the war story from the Second World War and all that caper, then yeah, it's history. We want to learn our own history. Don't leave the bits out, though, where the Soviet Union lost so many millions of people winning the war, not the Americans coming to our fucking savior. If you make it all balanced and fine, kids will understand. It doesn't have to be pushed down the throats. But I struggle. I must admit, I'll be so glad when this chapter's over. I'm trying my best, but I'm winging it a lot. I'm winging it.
Well, I mean, to a degree, we're all winging it a little bit, aren't we? You know,
some are winging better than others.
And on that bombshell, we'll press on then. We're now at the bottom of page 110. And just to give you a bit of context as to what we're going to talk about, Embery prefaces this passage by detailing the resistance led by women to the proliferation of gender identity ideology, which contains as one of its tenets that a person can be any gender that they choose and can demand that wider society must not only accept that choice, but must fully comply with it, granting access to women's safe spaces, including changing rooms, rape crisis centres and toilets. He then goes on to detail the example of Maya Forstater, a woman who holds the view that sex is immutable and that a person can identify as whatever they want, but their sex remains unchanged and they should not be granted access to sex-based safe spaces that do not match their birth sex. For holding this view and sharing it on social media, her contract, because I believe she was like a kind of private contractor, was not renewed after pressure was applied on her employers by their American owners. And so she went to employment tribunal. And at the original employment tribunal, the tribunal judge stated, and I quote, this is from the book, "The claimant is absolutist in her view of sex, and it is a core component of her belief that she will refer to a person by the sex she considered appropriate, even if it violates their dignity and or creates an intimidating, hostile, degrading, humiliating, or offensive environment. This approach is not worthy of respect in a democratic society." And Paul Embery goes on to say, "The judge seemed to be arguing that democracy depends upon citizens being compelled to say things they know in their hearts and heads to be false. But such an approach is surely the antithesis of a free and democratic society, more in keeping with the nature of the most totalitarian regimes." Now, to be absolutely clear, there is very little distinction, in my view, between a regime that you live in, for sake of argument, in this country in 2024, and the totalitarian regimes you think you're referring to in that passage. History has shown that Britain is, when it needs to be, an incredibly totalitarian and brutal state to its people. You know, you only have to look at examples going all the way back to things like the Merthyr Rising, more recently the Battle of Orgreave, and all the other things that I can think of off the top of my head in between. You know, Britain is very, very quick at getting the club out against the working class when it thinks the club's required. And you know, to necessarily, I mean, he doesn't necessarily say which regimes he's talking about, but you can kind of get the idea of who he's thinking of. Then there's almost no difference between the way our state will treat us if it has to, and the way that people think these totalitarian even regimes will treat their citizens. But if we, I mean, just some notes that I put on this particular passage. If we weren't already aware, there's no true freedom under capitalism, and in fact, capitalism has shown itself to be deeply authoritarian in nature. Things like freedom and democracy only exist in capitalism for as long as the position of the ruling class isn't threatened. The judge's statement is one of an activist judge, so a breed of judge who sees their job, and this is becoming quite prevalent, certainly in the United States.
Yeah, definitely.
Perhaps to a lesser degree here. A breed of judge who sees their job as not to interpret and apply the law, but to set precedents and policy on relatively new subjects like things like gender identity ideology. And that was what the judge did in this particular case. His summary of his findings read like they were written by the charity Stonewall, excoriating Forstater for her beliefs and taking the position that she created a hostile environment in holding her beliefs.
Yeah.
It should be said that she went to employment appeal tribunal in June 2022 and won her appeal, which means that she had been found to have been discriminated against on the basis of a belief that sex is immutable, and because case law is set, you can't set case law at employment tribunal, but you can set it at the appeal tribunal. That her belief that sex is immutable and that this belief is protected under the Equality Act 2010 is now case law. So Maya Forstater went through a lot of legal, financial, mental, all kinds of grief to get as far as the employment tribunal. Now, I'll say this. I remember at the time discussing this with colleagues of mine in the trade union movement, because I think, as a principle, I don't think anyone's employment should be at risk purely on the basis of what you believe or don't believe. And one answer that stuck in my mind from a person who was in the same trade union at the time as I was that, oh, they didn't sack up, they just didn't renew a contract. That was their answer. And my response was, okay, does that make it right? Is the fact that you through a technical or a technicality identify that she wasn't technically sacked because she technically wasn't employed by these people, that makes the contract not being renewed correct? And I think that's really what he was saying, that's really what he was saying. He was saying, as far as he was concerned, it was okay that the contract was rotten, not renewed because she held views that they were uncomfortable with.
Yeah, that mayor for starters, she's in an interview I saw that those judges or that particular judge had been on they have been on special training in order to make decisions parts of this Gender Recognition Act or identity politics law. Now, to me, if the training that they give them was by something like Stonewall, then the training would be biased. And if the training's biased, then the judgments that he makes forever after that, based on that training, that would be biased as well. So it doesn't surprise me that the initial judge um, ruled against her, and subsequently it was found for her in at the EAT, which is that as you call it, an activist judge like it is in America, and they're really bloody bang at it there, aren't they?
Yeah,
Changing policy he's there to make a decision on the facts, not as his opinion, but they were actually specifically trained apparently to make these kind of decisions. That's what Frustata said. Although it's not in Embery's book, but that's a recent interview I saw her on. She said that, and I can well believe that being the case. The state would want to make the judges support their view, and if they thought Frustata was incorrect and it went against what the ruling class wanted or the Labour Party wanted, then yeah, they'd have judges who were going to rule in their favour. Of course they would. They've always have done.
always have done.
We've never beaten them in an high court with a judge if it's against striking miners or dock workers, building workers.
Shrewsbury 24. I mean, exactly. Look how long it took them to get justice.
Yeah, you tell most of them are dead. When it comes to them finding out that they get exonerated, that's particularly close to my heart, that strike. But anyway, that's another subject for another day. But yeah, I just think that to me sums it as regard the state. A judge said, make sure she doesn't win. Her views, we cannot have this. And as it turned out, it's now in law that she did.
Yeah. And it should be said, I mean, I don't know, I haven't seen that particular interview you referenced. However, I am aware that Stonewall has and has had a huge educational program. A lot of public sector employers and a lot of private ones too are signed up to Stonewall's workplace diversity champion scheme. Now, that affiliation did cause some headlines a few years back when Ofcom decided it wasn't going to renew its association with Stonewall because Ofcom was accused of assessing complaints based on the training that they were given by Stonewall on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So by that I mean, if someone made a complaint for sake of argument about something that they found offensive that they watched on the television, then in order to get points in its workplace diversity scheme, it would have had to process the complaint in a way that Stonewall essentially agreed with. So it was outside influence on Ofcom. And because of that conflict of interest, Ofcom ended its association. And then, of course, the BBC did the same. Now, we could debate, maybe on another day, whether or not just by disassociating yourself from Stonewall, it changes anything within that organisation, given that Stonewall have already gone in, given all that training and that education, and the people that these organisations employ come from, again, going back to what we were saying about these sort of somewhat middle-class, university-educated backgrounds where they've already been indoctrinated in a lot of these ideologies already. And whether that changes anything or not, I would argue probably not.
Yeah.
But Stonewall, and I don't want to pick on Stonewall specifically as a charity, but they are a good example in terms of what we're talking about now. Stonewall has, since around about 2014, changed its tact from being a predominantly gay and lesbian rights organisation into one that's all in on gender identity ideology. And one of the things I've always argued was the critical moment at which that decision was made was in 2014. Gay marriage was legalised.
Right.
So almost, if you like, the last or one of the last hurdles that gay people had to cross to put themselves on a legally equal footing with heterosexual couples was that right to determine who your next of kin was, which is what married couples, men and women married couples, I mean, always had, obviously, but gay and lesbian couples didn't have. And that step largely, not completely, but largely closed the arguments, if you like, for gay and lesbian equality in this country. And Stonewall faced a dilemma because what at least some people who were very senior in the organisation and former senior people in the organisation wanted to do was to effectively not close down Stonewall, but to devolve it to a more local level, to do local work. But of course, you're talking about an organisation that employed, I think it was something in the region of 900 people. That has a chief executive who's handsomely remunerated, and they were generating a lot of income. And the only way I believe they could perpetuate that income was to change tact and go down a different road, and which is what they chose to do. And that's why they've been carrying out this almost industrial scale education program in major public sector employers and major private sector employers too. But it's backfired in terms of the Maya Forstater case. Like you said, you know, Maya Forstater is convinced that the judge and others like him would have gone through an education, some sort of seminar or some sort of training provided by Stonewall or someone of that ilk, with the aim of, at least on this particular subject, turning a judge from a person who interprets the law and makes a decision to someone who is campaigning on behalf of a certain set of beliefs. And that's concern, very concerning.
You
know. But like I think you said, these are essentially ruling class beliefs, aren't they? So they're doing what the judiciary have always done. Acted in the interest of the ruling class. So we'll move on then to page 113 of the book. So the section in this book is called Free Speech Imperiled. Now, we've already said what we think about free speech in this country. Whatever free speech you think you have is limited by what the ruling class think you can say. And the minute what you say threatens them, then they'll shut you down as soon as look at you. But putting that to one side, in the section Free Speech Imperiled, Embery details what he sees as the erosion of free speech in Britain through a culture that's becoming increasingly suffocating and repressive. And I'll quote as follows. It cannot be doubted that much of the responsibility for this gradual but nonetheless very deliberate subversion of one of our most ancient liberties lies with the liberal left. For it is the liberal left whose philosophy, rooted in the precepts of 1960s cultural revolution, now dominates throughout many of our media, and which sets the rules for what passes as acceptable opinion. And, for all its waxing lyrical about tolerance and diversity, it is the liberal left which exhibits an uncompromising ruthlessness when those rules are breached. Tolerance and diversity in everything but opinion seems to be its maxim. And it only requires one brief look at Twitter to find liberal left activists who want to see things like GB News closed down, or Nigel Farage taken off the air, or the fact that the talking heads of Novara Media refused to share a platform with Eddie Dempsey, who is one of the assistant general secretaries of the RMT, because he expressed a view about the frustrated working class that they didn't like, or even the writer of the book, Paul Embery, who was forced from the executive committee of his own trade union because he shared a platform with Nigel Farage at a pro-Brexit rally. And it demonstrates very clearly, if you believe the right is censorious, you've seen nothing yet until you've seen what the left can do.
Yeah.
And you will have seen nothing yet until you've seen what the left will call for. In fact, today, just today, someone on Twitter, I can't remember what, is it GB News or Quasi Kwarteng, is appearing as a regular guest on a, it might be Talk News, I can't remember what it was, but they were asking, why is this man always on telly? He broke the economy, he crashed the economy, he did this, he did that. Well, let's be clear about something. In that particular regard, he didn't have long enough to crash the economy. What caused the economy to have a meltdown was agitation from the Bank of England and the state bureaucracy against the budget that Kwasi Kwarteng had revealed, which was basically to cut taxes and borrow more, which made the whole financial sector in this country have a complete shit fit. And that shit fit resulted in a big run on the pound, a big devaluation of the pound, complete loss in Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss, and both of them being gone within a few days. But remember, it was the Labour Party who were cheering on the state bureaucrats and the Bank of England for turning on Kwasi Kwarteng. And any parliamentarian worth their salt should have said, no, hang on a sec, you're the head of the Bank of England and you're the hired hands of the state bureaucracy. You'll do what you're told by the elected representatives, not the other way round.
Yeah.
Labour were cheering on these state bureaucrats and cheering on the head of the Bank of England.
Well, yeah, they would.
All guns blazing.
They're probably cheering on when Farage had his bank account suspended, and people go, good. I said, well, hang on, you know, when you say good to him or that it's happened to him, you might not like the guy, you know, but once you can do it to him, why can't they do it to you?
Absolutely.
Well, why would they want to do it to me?
And it's already been done. It's already been done. If you remember a little while back when the Canadian truckers were blockading,
correct.
They were having their bank accounts frozen when Justin Trudeau dusted off an emergency act that hadn't been used since his father was prime minister.
Oh, yes.
They had their bank accounts frozen all the while Trotskyite activists were calling the truckers fascists, okay, and saying that there were Nazis among them.
Yeah.
They used the same law to freeze their GoFundMe that people were from all over the world were contributing.
I was just going to come to that. Yeah, they blocked that money.
They blocked that to the point where the only crowdfunding organization that was able to help them was for want of a better word, a right-wing Christian organization based in the United States that was willing to help them. Because if it wasn't for them, those truckers would have had their bank accounts and their GoFundMe frozen.
Yeah.
All the while the left were cheering it on. All the while.
That's the sad part of it. I mean, forgetting America, it's the sad part of it in Britain, where the left would have never done that 40 years ago. The left activists on the shop floor, I mean, I don't mean the pseudo left running the unions. I mean, the actual day-to-day shop stewards would have seen straight through that one. Well, you know, if they can ban him from going on that stage, they can ban us from going on strike. It's only you just have to put two and two together over the years and see that that's exactly what's happened. And if people think in their minds that, oh, well, it's a good thing that Starmer stops people screaming at the police. Well, it's not illegal to scream at the police. It depends what you say. I mean, if you're going to call them a fascist pig, well, might not be a good idea, but it's only an opinion. It's when you're violent with it. Now, you can't be going throwing bricks at them, and you can't be defunding them, in fairness. Because if you defund the police, what normal recourse do people have if they're a victim of crime?
Well, I mean, if you, I know we're going a little bit off the beaten track.
Yeah, I know, but that's probably me again, though.
No, but it's a good point. If you defund the police, who is most affected adversely? It's working class people, isn't it?
That's
you will, if you defund the police, all you do is you put working class people at even greater risk of crime. Defunding the police wasn't, isn't it? It's notable that a lot of people on the pseudo left in America were all in on this defunding the police bollocks, and then retreated as soon as they could the minute it started to look really bad for them making that case. I mean, look, don't get me wrong. I would agree with anyone who says that they, and I'm talking from an American perspective here, if they said we want to demilitarize the police, yes, I totally agree. One of the problems that I can see in the United States, in a lot of states and a lot of cities, is that the police have become increasingly militarized.
Yeah, they're like a little private army.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's not to say that the British police are necessarily better than the American police, but the British police were founded on the principle that they were not going to be military, even to the point where the ranks were not going to be the same as army ranks. So, you don't get, you've got constables instead of privates and things like that. So, it was deliberately done to make, at least on outward appearances, the police appear less military than what the Americans chose to do. But the long and the short of it is, as bad as the police can be and have been, in a lot of communities, they need their police because the alternative is too terrifying to contemplate, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it is. That's the thing. They are there to do a job and to fight crime. I don't agree they should be at pride marches dancing the Macarena or whatever it was they were doing, or having the face painted. They're there to police marches.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah,
we know what
absolutely.
they've done, and they were, and to the miners at Orgreave, and also to the building
there you
workers
go.
and
Absolutely.
football supporters over the years. So that there's bad everywhere in them.
Yeah,
Not all bad.
absolutely. But it's this going
The
back to,
principle is of having the police force is okay.
of course, yeah, absolutely. And it's, I mean, in socialist and communist societies, there was still a police. Still, there had to be a means by which to
Well, there
keep
has to be because you've
order.
still got criminals. When I was the
Yes,
first
yeah,
time I was in Cuba, I said to the courier, this is back in '97, and I said to the courier, we're passing these buildings, but you're not saying what they are. They flats, blocks. He says, no, prisons. And I said, oh, so there is crime in the land of milk and honey. She said, oh, there's plenty of crime. And daft as it, and the funny part it was, she said that the biggest crime is murder, but it's usually wives murdering husbands. So the
really?
jails are full of women. But that was in '97. That's what she
Right.
said to me. I
Okay.
haven't got any figures to substantiate that. But it just shows that in all societies, they have to have police. It's just that, sadly, they're not as independent as they should be.
Absolutely. But anyway, getting back to the point about the way the left views people with, should we say, non-compliant views. There was a time not so long ago when discourse was comradely. We would discuss and debate things which affected us, and if we didn't agree, we were still comrades. The bigger fight was, or it was the bigger fight that kept us together. But now, in a middle class dominated left of today, where far too many advocates of leftism can't even make an argument, let alone remain comradely, any challenge or deviation from the rigid and narrow set of predetermined beliefs that the left and the Labour movement hold is met with disconnection, excommunication, and cancellation. And that's really it. I mean, as I said in the notes earlier on, Eddie Dempsey, a regular working class guy who's ascended to very near the top of the RMT, was basically no platform because Navarra Media didn't like some things he said about working class people. I mean, well, we've all got I think some of us at least have got very strong views about Navarra Media and what purpose they serve, and it's not a purpose for us, I should say. But it's not really a surprise that they did that to Eddie, because Eddie's got unpopular views and he drops his teas every now and again. This is not the sort of thing that Navarra Media
Oh
like.
no,
And to say, and it's a bit like with or slightly similar to the riots that we saw in this country a few weeks ago. It's all very well and it's all very easy to label everyone who took part in those riots as racists and fascists and bigots. Very easy to do. But what's harder is to understand why at least some of those people ended up taking to the streets. And without getting too philosophical, but you don't get a fire without the dry tinder to start it. So those people, and I'm not saying it's all of them, it could have been half a court, right? I don't know. But the problems that were taken onto the street were real. The problems of housing shortages, the problems of NHS provision, the problems of finding places for your kids for school. Now, I'm not saying everyone that took to the streets during those riots was protesting against those things. There might have been quite a lot of opportunists there. I don't know. But the long and the short of it is that if those problems didn't exist, then opportunists would not have an opportunity.
No, that's true.
It's far too easy for the left to go, well, they're all bigots, they're all fascists, they're all racists, and then dismiss any of their concerns.
Well, yeah, because, you know, if you keep shouting on about something and then they turn around and say, well, that's wrong, that's racist, that's homophobic, that's anti-Semitic, that sooner or later, people are going to say, well, you know what, I'm going to put my head above the thing here. I'm going to get it blown off. I'm just going to shut up about it. And that's gradually what I think the Labour Party are doing with freedom of speech. It's being destroyed.
Yeah.
Slowly but surely, bit by bit, the same as Thatcher did with her anti-trade union laws, bit by bit, piecemeal. This is the same sort of insidious programme that Starmer's got. He compares, to be honest with you, I made a comment the other day to my wife and I thought, was that right? And I said, in some respects, I despise Starmer more than I ever did Thatcher, and I despise that woman. And it just struck me as being odd that I would say that. But then when I thought about it, I thought, no, I'm right. I despise Starmer more than Thatcher.
Well, I'm old enough to remember governments probably going all the way back to about 1979. I was quite young, I must say, in 1979. I flatter myself, but I don't remember a government becoming as unpopular in such a short amount of time as this government's done. It's quite impressive,
especially with a landslide victory.
A so-called landslide victory, yeah.
Yeah, Thatcher had one in '79 and got elected, and she went in unpopular. People were sick of Labour. They wanted to change, whatever reasons that they have to change the vote. We know it's the B team this time as opposed to the A team, and the next time it will be back to the A team. So we know this, but at the time, you know, he's on this unprecedented, well, not unprecedented, but nearly as big as any landslide, and taking all those seats away, winning a massive majority, going, wow, you know what, this is great. And what does he do with it? Squander the power that he's got by taking money off pensioners and things like that, when he knows his own ministers are on heating allowance. What the fuck is going on?
Yeah, exactly.
And I've said this before, it's something that always sticks in my mind. It's the annoying part with these people is they lie to us. We know they're lying to us. But the thing is, they know that we know, and they don't give a shit.
So this is a copy of yesterday's Financial Times. And on the front page, employers win right to keep staff on probation after Labour compromise. And the headline, the first paragraph says, companies will be able to keep new hires on probation for up to 6 months under a compromise Labour plan, despite an election pledge to give employees day one rights.
Yeah.
I mean, there's nothing, it would appear, that Labour will not do a volte-face on. And they've only been in charge, 10 weeks? 10 weeks. And like you said, Dave, after months and months and years even of talking about threats to the winter fuel payment and pledging to protect it, they withdrew it. They've taken away, or they've at least reneged on a pledge to give workers rights from day one, and a whole raft of other things. You know, the 1.4 billion pounds a year they saved on giving pensioners payments for their winter fuel bills. 600 million of it went in a brown envelope and headed straight to Ukraine. And God knows what they'll do with that money. A lot of it will go up a few people's noses, I shouldn't imagine. But and as a working class person, or at least as a pensioner, how does that make sense? How does it make sense that you lose your £300 a year payment, and then money is basically bundled up and sent to a country hundreds and hundreds of miles away in a war that's not your war, that you don't necessarily support, and is basically the ruling class's punch up, not ours.
Yeah,
It leaves a bitter taste in the mouth, doesn't it?
it certainly does. It certainly does. I mean, it's a lot of my contemporaries are all retired. Obviously, they're all my age, would be the late 60s or early 70s. So they're all on a pension. Some are more better than others, depending where they work, so they wouldn't qualify for it anyway, depending on your income. But even depending on your income and having the lowest pension in Europe, even lower than Spain, who's one of the highest,
Mm.
how can they say that a living wage is a certain amount of money per week, but that is not what a pensioner gets? Pensioner has, if he's on a basic pension, has to have it topped up by the state. Well, as we've discussed. Now, if you've worked in a company that had a pension fund, then obviously in my case, mine's topped up by the Royal Mail and the Burma Oil Company. So I've got two little pensions which top me up, which take me over the threshold anyway. Well, that doesn't mean to say I'm on 100 grand a fucking year. I can live and have 4 or 5 holidays and buy £2,000 Armani suits. You're living from week to week.
Yeah.
Or in my case, fortnight to fortnight with the pension. That's how I get my fortnightly. I'm my company pension monthly, but everyone's in the same boat as me. And what they see is, well, I got a pension rise on my old age pension, but all they did was they took more tax off me company pension. So I might have gained £3 out of a £10 rise. It's fucking meaningless. Might as well not give me the rise, to be honest. Little things like that people spot. And they go, oh, hang on a minute, why has this happened? Blah, 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 blah. Then the winter fuel payment comes in, they're all up in arms. Some are saying, well, I'm not entitled to it, they say, so I'm not bothered. But I feel sorry for those people who are going to lose it. And the pensions are getting topped up unless you're on pension credit, but you can't be on pension credit if you're in my case, if your wife's younger than you. Because as a couple, you've got to be both pensionable, pension age, to claim pension credit as a couple.
Right.
Now, if we divorced, then I could claim pension credit as a single person. I would get it. Obviously, she's not old enough to get a pension. So she's 10 years younger than me. So the thing is that it's a load of bollocks when they say, I've got it, she'll be 66 and I'll be 76 when we're entitled to a little bit top up on our pension.
Yeah.
We'll all be sent off to fucking Ukraine by then.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
It's a disgrace, to be honest.
No, it is. You're right.
Little things like that people say, as soon as I saw the £3 billion going to the Ukraine, and then the money that they would cost to pay the pensions, 1.4 or 1.3 billion, I thought, well, there's the calculation to be made. Take the 1.4 billion off the money that you send to the Ukraine. If you want to send them the rest, it's up to you. But keep the winter fuel payments. Why have they done that? What is the reasoning behind why they've done that? It wasn't because there was, as Rachel Reeves, who probably spent 6 months in the Bank of England on a school scheme or something, says she's chancellor of the Exchequer. There was going to be a run on the pound and we'd all be bankrupt because of the fucking pensioners. Don't make me laugh.
Bollocks. That's complete bollocks, and she knows it. She knows that's crap.
Yeah, we know she knows it, but the sad thing is, a lot of them probably didn't go out and vote at the election time. Pensioners,
yeah,
give up.
Yeah,
They
no,
just
that's probably true. I mean, it's fair to say that one of the big groups of voters that the Tories can generally rely on are pensioners, isn't it? And I think, as we saw in July, the Tories vote largely collapsed, and if it was people staying, if it wasn't pensioners staying at home, it was pensioners voting for reform.
Yeah, I'll go along with that.
Yeah, but yeah, I almost think that the Labour Party have looked at the voter demographic and thought, well, pensioners never vote for us anyway. Sod it, we'll just go after them. we'll save a few bob from them. And I mean, look, £1.4 billion is a lot of money. But it isn't when you look at the amount of money this country sent to Ukraine to fight an imperialist war.
Yeah.
But no, this always happens, and working class people are very, very astute at this. Is they will say, well, why did you take away the winter fuel payments when you waste all this money on XYZ? And it's a very, very straightforward argument, isn't it? And it's a very, very difficult one to rebuff as well. Very difficult to argue down someone who says, well, I think you might as well give the old age pensioners their £300 a year and scrap this scheme instead, because we don't need that, or we don't need to spend it on a war in Ukraine, which, to be frank, a lot of people couldn't find on a map. It's anyway. That's the problem in this country, and I think, as I said earlier on, I think Labour I don't think they ever had a honeymoon period, let alone the honeymoon period being over. It never started.
No.
And now they're knee deep in it. And I will predict that they will be gone by the next election. Next election,
Yes.
they will be swept away. And some sort of conservative, small c conservative, possibly government will be in charge by 2029. And like you said a little while ago, it would have been a Labour Party with an enormous mandate, maybe more in terms of seats and votes, but they had an enormous mandate and they conspired to completely blow it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, let's move on. At the bottom of the same page, so we're still on page 113, and I quote: "There was a time when those opposing the arguments would say, 'I think you're wrong,' or 'I disagree with you.' But today, it's increasingly common to hear instead the commandment, 'You mustn't say that.'" In the following pages, Embery then goes on to discuss the use of offence as the trump card that the left deploy to shut down discourse on testy or difficult topics. They use the phrase, "I am offended," not only to end arguments, to negate any and all points that the other person was making. Invariably, the person deploying the "I am offended" tactic isn't offended, but rather losing an argument or straying into territory that they're not comfortable with.
Society, Jason, society's been forced to accommodate the wishes of a tiny minority of people that make statements, or their wishes must be known. We're upset. Oh fuck! If they're upset, that's this little tiny minority. Then the world's going to stop. So we have to conform to other people being upset. Well,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but I think was it Ricky Gervais who said, "You may be offended by my remarks, but that in itself doesn't make my remarks offensive."
That's right.
Which is right, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I remember.
About it.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have any comedians in the past. What about
No.
Jethro,
Well, Ken
Brown?
Dodd. I remember Ken Dodd in an interview. He said, "There's no such thing as an offensive joke, only a joke that offends."
Yes.
And it's true. It's true. It's just that, unfortunately, in Britain in 2024, we got those things arse about face now.
Yeah.
That it's the opposite. It's also the idea that because you and I might be having an argument, you make a point and it offends me, and I say that's offensive, and in that statement, I shut down the argument. The argument is ended simply by me saying, "I find that offensive," or "You have offended me." And in left-wing circles, that's a very useful tool to use when you're being nailed in an argument repeatedly by someone who knows more about a given topic than you. You can just go, "I find that offensive," and that ends it. It's your little joker you can play. But
that's fair enough.
So Embery goes on in the chapter to talk about the preeminence of progressive views, and by that, what he means is that there is a certain ilk of person, especially on the left, it has to be said, who see themselves as somehow better people because they have progressive views. And so I'll quote from the book. We're on page 117 now. "The prominent campaigning outfit Stop Funding Hate is a prime example of this way of thinking. This group publicly names and shames businesses that advertise in certain newspapers, and with whose editorial line it disagrees. The objective is to encourage consumers to boycott these businesses until they agree to pull their adverts. But of course, these newspapers are exclusively of a conservative persuasion and, in some cases, take a robust stance on issues such as immigration or are otherwise not in step with fashionable opinion on social or moral issues. And it's important to be naturally sceptical of any organisation that claims to be railing against hate. These organisations are often founded with the assistance of the state and are heavily supported by the liberal left, who conflate hate with things that they either don't like or don't agree with, or both. Stop Funding Hate has taken aim at GB News and the Daily Mail in the past for the reasons that Embery outlines. And the fact is that neither outlet spouts hate, but instead takes positions or reports on subjects that the liberal left do not like. Hence their spinning of this coverage as hate. What Stop Funding Hate really hate is views they don't agree with. And
Yeah.
and generally speaking, when someone says that an organisation or an individual is spewing hate, that's what they mean. They hate what they're saying. It's not that they're actually, I mean, it's difficult to define what hate speech even is, but it's usually, in my view, a reaction of someone of that persuasion to something they don't like. And this Stop Funding Hate group, as Embery said in the book, was lobbying people to boycott any organisation that advertised on GB News or on the pages of the Daily Mail. Now, if I recall correctly, Paul Embery has written columns in the past for the Daily Mail, and I don't know if he still regularly appears, but he did certainly regularly appear on GB News. And there was a time not that long ago when I would have been of the same persuasion as entities like Stop Funding Hate. It's like, what sort of thing are you doing going on to an outlet or writing in a newspaper whose views are completely incongruent with your own? But I actually have changed my mind. I think it's sometimes better to actually talk to an audience that doesn't necessarily agree with you. You know, Paul Embery could have written an article for sake of argument in the Morning Star, and apart from the fact that no sod would have read it, everyone that would have read it, in all likelihood, would have agreed with perhaps the bulk of what he said. Although there are, I have to say, a lot of people on the left that don't like Paul Embery, a lot of his views. But you know, there's no point talking to people who largely will agree with you. You've really got to go out there and talk to people who won't agree with you.
Yeah.
Not necessarily the first time of hearing you will agree with you. You know, I mean, I know a lot of people who would identify themselves as conservative have a lot of time for people like George Galloway, because George Galloway is very forthright in his views, very eloquent in how he puts them across. You know, sometimes people are persuaded sometimes by people they would not necessarily agree with, but can put together an argument that makes sense. But for organisations to basically try to starve media outlets they don't like of funding, it doesn't exactly smack of free speech, does it?
No, it doesn't. No, you're right.
Yeah, and it's just another symptom of the liberal left. The liberal left's attitude to freedom of discourse, the right to hold differing views, but essentially all be in the same boat politically. You know, that sort of thing's largely gone now, hasn't it? I mean, you know, I've watched on YouTube videos of old Labour Party conferences. I'm going back to like the 80s now when I talk about them, and you would have had
Neil
all
Kinnock.
kinds. Neil Kinnock, absolutely, all Baron Kinnock of Bedwellty, to give a proper title. You know, these people in that conference hall would have been from all different parts of the political spectrum.
Yes.
You know, still fundamentally of the left. You know, some a lot more than others. But there was, even in that conference hall, a diversity of views and opinions. Some not particularly nice opinions, some not particularly welcome opinions, but they were allowed to stand at the rostrum and make them anyway. and the left's moved away from that. It's moved away from allowing that diversity of opinion to exist, and that comradely debate to exist, because it doesn't fit with their rather narrow view of the world. And it's also because, in my view, too many people on the left can't argue their way out of a wet paper bag.
That's the point. That is
Yeah.
exactly the point. They can't, because they're not working class.
Mm.
A lot now, as you say, a lot of people weren't postmen or miners or building workers elected to parliament. They're lawyers, graduates of business studies. Not to denigrate people who graduate in business studies, but if their idea is to get into politics, that's the sort of subject they need to be doing.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
they see it as the Labour Party used to be to the untrained eye, I suppose. It did. To me, it's never been any good, really. We were just hoodwinked by them when you look back in history. But people would look at it, the Labour Party, and say, well, he puts a good argument forward, or she puts a good argument forward. And then you listen to the argument, and say, well, it is no argument. You've been brainwashed to believe that that's the way that, it should be. What she or he's telling you, you've got to sift this information for yourself. And if it means reading the Daily Mail, then so be it. Look at
Yeah,
the article.
absolutely.
Look at the article
Absolutely.
in the Daily Mail if it helps you to understand why we're treated the way we are, and why, to quote the book, the modern left loathes the working class.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I found myself, as I've developed a more, and I'm not claiming to be a nailed on Marxist, because I don't think I've learnt enough about it yet, but I I've I've started to develop a Marxist understanding of the world. And I think as part of that, and I note this from a lot of the podcasts I listen to and a lot of the YouTube channels I watch, which is that a lot of people with a more Marxist understanding of the world are much more willing and able to listen to the views of people who are politically diametrically opposed to them. You know, a lot of, and I do it myself, I listen to conservative commentators, not exclusively, but I listen to the views of conservative commentators quite a lot. And it would be something that not that long ago I would have thought was completely antithetical. It would be something I would never have done. I would only have listened to people I would have been inclined to agree with. And the understanding I've developed over the last few years is it's important to listen to people that you don't necessarily
Yeah,
agree with,
that's
because it's about testing your own beliefs, isn't it?
yeah, but that's the point that I think I was making earlier on about the bubble. That if you're in an echo chamber where you speak and somebody speaks back to you in the same tone with the same arguments, and we all singing off the same hymn sheet, then you think everything's hunky dory, but the rest of the world thinks you're a load of shite.
Mm.
And you've got to understand what them people want. That's the problem. Those people in Parliament are in their bubble, and they think that we should all understand that everything they say is the law, is correct, and they are God's gift in intelligence, which they're not. There's far more intelligent people I still communicate with and speak to on even Facebook that I used to go to school with. They've got more intelligence than that bloody useless Lammy. We won't go on
Another
pillorize them.
lawyer, funnily enough.
Yes, another lawyer.
Another lawyer.
Yeah.
But yeah. I mean, look, I call it what it is. You know, often I'll walk to the railway station to go to work, and I'll listen to a conservative commentator, and I do have to laugh out loud sometimes when they call Kamala Harris a communist. But you know, I think it's important to listen to things you don't necessarily agree with. You know,
Yes, I agree.
it keeps your mind
Yeah, but
focused. I mean, it's about making arguments in your own mind about the points that they make. But it's also because, generally speaking, and this is a generalisation, I must admit, but in my view, a lot of conservative commentators are more entertaining than the left wing ones.
know,
I
yeah.
would listen to Matt Walsh over Owen Jones any day.
Oh,
You know, because
that
I
guy's
find
got more
Matt
splinters in
Walsh
his
more
ass than
entertaining to
anyone.
listen to. Yeah.
Owen Jones, take
Well,
the
yeah.
splinters out your ass, though. And he bollocked back to me on Twitter one time. I said, "Go, Owen, get the splinters out your ass. says, "Well, what do you mean by that?" He said, "I've always had firm views." And I went, "Oh, right, okay, yeah,
Yeah.
firm as a
Yeah.
blancmange, if you can remember one of them was."
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
But yeah, yeah, you're right. You can't. You've got to see both sides, even though you can learn by listening to somebody of a different political persuasion. But I
Absolutely.
can't get it into my head where they call Keir Starmer is worse than Stalin. I just what I said to some guy, "What are you saying? Stalin was bad. Uncle Joe was bad. Is that what you're saying? Because if you're saying Starmer's worse, then Uncle Joe must have been really bad."
Most people
Dickheads.
who do things like accuse Sir Keir Starmer of being like Stalin, or uh, equate Nazism with communism,
Oh
even though communism defeated Nazism in 1944. You know, it's things like that that reveal the deep-seated ignorance of these people, isn't it? They clearly don't know even a modicum of history to make
no,
those
none of them.
comparisons. Don't know who Joseph Stalin was or what he achieved as part of the leadership of the Soviet Union and that sort of thing. And the only thing really, the most appropriate response is just to laugh at these people because they're
Yeah, I know it gets my goat though, because I find it hard just to laugh. I've got to make some remark, but it's
yeah,
just one of them, isn't it? That's just me.
yeah.
Um, they probably think they can get a rise out of me. I can see when they're going too far, but yeah, they can call him all they want. I just think I didn't want Uncle Joe Stalin's name be smirched in the mud with alongside Keir Starmer. That was basically what I was trying to get
Yeah,
over.
yeah, absolutely.
And if you keep saying the Ukraine, it really annoys them.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Well, we'll press on.
We
We're at
will.
now the top of page 121. In the section debating our language, Embery explains the modern left's use of a collection of terms including hate, far right, fascist, and Nazi, and notes that in fact almost everybody that they pin with all or one or all of these badges is in fact nothing of the sort. And I'll quote from the book. For example, when the House of Commons agreed to hold a general election in 2019, Labour shadow cabinet member Dawn Butler tweeted, "The general election has been called. This isn't a normal election. It is the fight of our lives to save our country from the far right." To the uninitiated, Butler's alert may have constituted a portent of a Britain besieged by jackboots and swastikas, rather than the prospect of a government containing figures such as Sajid Javid and Priti Patel. Now, as I put in my notes, I have met Dawn Butler. Um, I have to say she struck me as many MPs struck me that I've met and that I've seen on television as some of the most, or she's one of the most stupid people I've ever met in my life. Um, who comes out with absolutely ridiculous hyperbole like this and expects to be taken seriously by the electorate of her constituency and the wider public. Um, I mean, as I put in my notes, much like the US Democrats and their ridiculous saving democracy claims when opposing Donald Trump, Butler's words were totally vacuous rhetoric from a deeply limited politician. The modern Conservative Party may not be that conservative anymore, but they're more diverse than they've ever been and have a voter base that is every bit as demographically diverse as the Labour Party.
Mm.
Much like the anti-Brexit protesters who claimed that Brexit was racist and who Diane Abbott supported, the modern left will desperately and cynically reach for phrases and terminologies which they think will chime with their core demographic, even if there isn't a shred of evidence to support it. And the critical thing here is, for me, how on earth do you persuade someone who voted for Brexit to change their view if you're called a racist for voting Brexit?
Well, you
That's
won't.
not gonna that's not gonna persuade anyone to come
No.
round to your way of thinking. And it's truly ridiculous how people like Dawn Butler and others will talk about trying to save democracy. The Democrats in America, of course, lest we
Yeah.
forget, do it almost every chance that they get. Um, you know, the idea that the likes of Boris Johnson, and you know, as I said in the notes, you know, Sajid Javid and Priti Patel are somehow far right is bonkers, and it speaks to the lack of historical understanding that they have of what the real far right
But
really is, isn't
it
it?
actually denigrates the battle that people have had against fascism in the past, whether
Yes.
it be in the Second World War, whether it be in London against Mosley
Yeah.
and all them,
Yeah.
and other such battles that have been fought around the world. But you're saying that a bunch of Tory politicians are the far right. Well, it's ridiculous. I mean, Lammy said the same thing basically
Yeah.
over the ERG group, a
Yeah.
bunch of Nazis, and
Yeah.
what did he say? And that's being unkind to Nazis.
Yeah.
How do you
That's
get
right.
away with things like that?
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
think people look at that guy and just say that guy's an idiot.
He's an idiot, and he's also a lawyer.
He's a
Whether
dangerous
those two
idiot.
things are coincidental, I don't know, and I'm not going to speculate. But you know, yeah. I mean, we again. I'll emphasise the point. We have some incredibly stupid politicians in Parliament. You know, I mean, I'm old enough to remember the old Thatcher government of the 1980s, and they were horrible people, but they were clever. They
Oh
knew
yeah.
exactly what they were doing, um, and were nothing like the politicians that fill the benches of Parliament these days. You know, these people are deeply detached and stupid people.
Well, you could see, yes, in them times, you could see that's why they were horrible bastards, because you knew that they were doing what was right for the Conservatives and, as it timed, the ruling class. But then again, you've got Kinnock in charge of the Labour Party, and everyone's thinking, well, this guy's a buffoon anyway. But at least there were some people in the party that you thought might have done some good for the working class, you know, like Eric Effer, Teddy Fields, people like him. But he was militant as it happened and got thrown out. But having said that, there were bigger voices. Skinner, Claire Short, there were bigger voices for the working class than there are now. Definitely.
Hmm.
And we've said it before, as you couldn't get a fag paper between a Tory and a Labour MP now. I don't give a monkeys who they are. There's nothing to choose between them.
No, no. As I've said before, you look at the benches of the Houses of Parliament, and with very, very few exceptions, you're talking about people who came from the same backgrounds, educated in the same kinds of schools, went to the same sorts of universities. If they did work at all, they would have worked in similar industries, in similar roles. There's very, very little, if any, difference between Labour MPs and Tory MPs. There are no shipbuilders, there are no miners, there are
No,
no firemen or firefighters. Sorry, you know, there's no working class people. Um, and if there are working class people, they've long since abandoned their roots. They've long since abandoned that. You
yes,
know,
I mean, yeah,
and they have absolutely no interest in going back to their working class heritage at all. You know, they are um, to use a Malcolm Tuckerism from the thick of it, built and owned by the British state. They work on their behalf now, and always have done and always will do.
yeah,
And yes, you know that. I mean, I can conceive of a time when, if the Tories had lost an election to the extent that the Tories in July lost an election, they'd be absolutely devastated. Now, I don't think they give a shit. I don't think they
no,
care.
no,
Couldn't
because they
care
know
less.
they'll be back in 5 years.
They'll be back in 5 years in one form or another.
Yeah,
And the long and the short of it is that the Labour Party will do very little different to what they intended to do if they won the election in July.
yeah,
So the continuity remains. So
yeah.
anyway, let's press on. We're now at the bottom of page 121, and I'll quote as follows. Sometimes prominent voices on the liberal left are oblivious to the contradictions in their own arguments. For example, In October 2019, Guardian columnist Andy Beckett penned a piece entitled "Britain was complacent about the far right, now it's out in force." In it, he recalled that the leader of the British Union of Fascists, Oswald Mosley, was banned by the BBC for over 30 years and bemoaned that it was hard to imagine such a ban being imposed on a big far right figure today. Nigel Farage has been a panellist on BBC One's Question Time 33 times. Boris Johnson has adopted the boot boy phrases and demagoguery of the far right. The implication was clear. Farage and Johnson were the modern day Mosleyites and should be subjected to the same degree of censorship as Mosley was. And, you know, I've said this before, I'll say it again. Neither Farage or Johnson are far right or indeed fascists. Farage is essentially a Thatcherite and Johnson is a small state libertarian. And essentially, they're both servants of British imperialism.
Yes.
Certainly, neither are at the vanguard of a new Reich. But interestingly, to make mention about Oswald Mosley, and you mentioned him in passing just now when you were talking about the Battle of Cable Street. In the 1950s, Oswald Mosley wrote a pamphlet in which he detailed that in order to best exploit the black nations of Africa, European nations should form a union under one central government, with national parliaments in each member country having full power over all social and cultural problems, subject only to the overriding power of European government in finance and its other defined spheres, in particular the duty of economic leadership. So essentially, Mosley advocated for the founding of a European Union. And as Mosley predicted in his pamphlet, the actual European Union has been adept at ruthlessly exploiting the black nations of the African continent for decades. And it should be noted that the European Union has always enjoyed the warm support of the Guardian newspaper and its columnists. I mean, you couldn't make it up, could you? You know, a lot of people advocating for what they perceive to be the progressivism of the European Union, when Oswald Mosley in the 1950s was calling for a European Union to better exploit the sub-Saharan African states.
Yeah. And that's exactly what they did.
That's exactly what they did and do to this day.
Yeah.
I mean, one example I always give of the European Union's imperialism and it's the way it treats the sub-Saharan African states is coffee. The berries that make coffee can be imported to the European Union with no tariffs attached. However, if a country in Africa was to grow the berries, process the coffee themselves and import it to the European Union, it would have a tariff put on it. And what that means is that the European Union will import the berries at a very, very low cost to the farmer who grew them, process them inside the European Union, then sell them at a profit to each other in the European Union. So the poor farmer who grows the berries, he gets stitched by the European Union, while the European Union countries cream off all the profit from the process.
Yeah, well, that's coming to an end, in my opinion, and quite rightly so. With these in the what is it, Burkina Faso and the other two states have said. Even Gaddafi was trying to get a united Africa with a goal, with a standard currency, and that they got rid of him because they couldn't have that.
Yeah,
and it's because of this exploitation, profit making. Take that away, and they've got to look elsewhere. Then they go exploiting South America, and that's being cut off slowly. They're forming like groups that won't allow them in. They won't allow themselves to be exploited anymore. These people aren't. They've got clever people running the show in some of these countries now, haven't they? And they might have come from the army. So what if their heart is there? And Thomas Sankara was army. His heart was for the people. That's what you need. Fidel Castro, Che, they're all for the people. And the country grows in socialism then, without being exploited by the West or America and Europe.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to stay on the subject of Brexit now because bottom of page 122, Embery says this. In March 2018, before attending an anti-Brexit demonstration, one of his leading organisers tweeted, quote, "Today, I told a Spanish friend that I was going to the UK to go to a demo. She asked what it was about, and I said to fight against the fascist actions of the British government. Those words actually came out of my mouth. And that's when it sank in what hashtag stop Brexit really is, unquote. In the 1930s, Embery says, many Britons travelled to Spain to fight real fascists. Now some were making the reverse trip to fight
Yeah.
imaginary ones. And it's absolutely spot on. I mean, let's be absolutely clear. I dare say this particular person who made this tweet had never heard of the International Brigades, never
No.
heard about the or at least only heard about the Spanish Civil War in passing, and had no idea of the sacrifices that people from this country and others made in fighting actual fascism in
Yes.
Spain. And the idea that the anti-Brexit demonstrations were somehow a last stand against fascism is, of course, completely ludicrous, but serves to demonstrate how deluded and divorced from reality some modern leftists are. In fact, their delusion and divorce from reality begins with their wholehearted support of an imperialist trading bloc like the European Union. They can't conceive that the European Union ruthlessly exploits nations across the world and uses the free movement of goods, capital, and people as a tool to suppress wages and to ravage nations like those that joined after the counter-revolutionary period, which brought about the collapse of the old Eastern Bloc. And yet these people will dress their struggle in the defence of imperialism as somehow anti-fascistic. And this is where we are, isn't it? I mean, you know, we're talking about a modern left now that will defend an imperialist trading bloc in the name of defeating fascism. I mean, it's difficult to know what to say in response to that, other than these people are deeply, deeply uneducated and ignorant of their history and of the facts at play. And it's very, very easy to you know, get yourself motivated to go into any movement if you think you're fighting fascism, even if
But
fascism you've made up.
yeah, but even when I was at school, secondary school, they tried to indoctrinate us into anti-Soviet thoughts, if you like. Um, so it's been going on, and I knew this from an early age, so it wasn't so bad for me because I was coming at thinking, well, I'm not taking any notice of what these say about history because they'll only tell me what they want me to, even at 14. So when my son was going to school, junior school, and I was saying, this is the way, you know, I was showing him what it was like in Cuba, their revolution and what Russia and all this. And somebody said to me, "You're indoctrinating your child." And I said, "Too right I am, because when he gets there, they'll do it. If I don't, they'll indoctrinate him the other way." And that's what these people who've been in these bubbles again, they are indoctrinated. So they will. They do think that the far right is Javid and Priti Patel.
Um, we're coming towards the end of our time. Was there anything else from the chapter, Terry, that you wanted to raise before we say goodbye to everybody?
No, not really, Jason. Only that. I mean, I'm talking about election results. Was it any wonder how the election results went? Have gone in recent times when we are not represented in Parliament by our peers rather than by our despots.
Yes, yes. I mean, I mean, you could argue, and I would certainly argue that we like. I don't think any Western state, be it the United States, Canada, Britain, France, Germany, wherever, is truly democratic. What you have is a representative government, which is every 4 years, 5 years, whatever it is, you get the chance to say who your government is. A vote is called, you go to the ballot box, you make your vote or not, as the case may be, and whoever wins runs the country for that period of time. And your input is to decide who is going to work in government for that period. That's the end of your say. That's where your say begins and ends.
Exactly.
And as has been increasingly happening in this country and across Western Europe and across the imperialist bloc for arguably over 70 years, I'd say, the connection between our rulers and us has grown wider and wider. The connection's broken, and the gap between us has become wider and wider. And I think that more and more people are coming to the conclusion that you can't now effectively vote for change. You might be able to vote for a change of government. You might even be able to vote for a change of colour rosette on the lapel. But the reality is that things cannot be changed through the ballot box.
No,
And maybe we need to find a different way.
we do. Absolutely, we do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll close on that. Just to say again, Paul Embery's book, Despised, Why the Modern Left Loathes the Working Class, is available at all good bookshops. It's published by Polity Books. I'll put a link to Polity Books' website in the description. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe to the channel. On the middle-aged revolutionary blog.com, I've just published my latest article. It's on Labour and the National Health Service. Do give it a read. I've had a lot of positive feedback so far. So yeah, please look at that. If you've enjoyed this episode and haven't seen the previous 3, I shall put links to each of those in the description. In part 5 of our book review of Despised, we look at it's a lighter chapter for you, Terry, this time. It's called The Case for the Nation State. Something nice and light and frothy for us to work through. So I'm looking forward to doing the notes for that and talking about that next time we meet up and do a recording. Yes. But for now, from me, the middle-aged revolutionary, it's goodbye. Terry, thanks for joining me.
And it's good night from me.
Absolutely. And we'll see you again soon. Thanks for joining us.
We certainly will. See you,
Thank
Jason.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.